time to thank all of you for joining us on tonight's webinar. I'm sure you guys have busy schedules, and it does mean a lot to us that you take time out of your schedule to listen to our webinar and learn more about the ALCAT test. Whether you're an existing provider looking for a refresher or a new provider or an interested provider, we thank you for joining us. Let's begin by telling you a little bit about our company, about Cell Science Systems. We are a privately held U.S. medical laboratory, and we've been in business for over 25 years. Actually, one of the things that sets us apart from a lot of the laboratories out there offering food sensitivity testing is that we have actually started the whole process from the beginning to end. So we actually developed and we manufacture our own analyzers, and it's called the RoboCat 2. We have patents on this technology, and it's based off of very simple blood analysis technology, such as a culture counter. It's basically a modified culture counter. And we have the 3 patents on that, so it allows us to be the only laboratory in the country, and actually in the world, that can offer this type of test. Most laboratories out there don't have that ability and don't really look at things from the ground up the way we do, and we'll get more a little bit into how we do that with the antigens and everything like that. But we are an FDA-inspected and registered medical device manufacturer. We're CLIA inspected and licensed. We're ISO certified, and we're actually worldwide, where if you have any patients in any other countries, we can either service them here in our worldwide headquarters in Florida, or we have other partners all over the country, all over the world, that are able to offer this type of testing to patients everywhere. So what is the ALCAT test? The ALCAT test is the only test of its kind, mostly due to the fact that we have the patent on the technology, but also because we approached food sensitivity testing in a completely different manner, and we pretty much revolutionized the industry by doing so. It's a unique method, as you can see here, for testing each individual's cellular response to foods, chemicals, and mold. So what we do is we're looking at whole blood. The test is live whole blood, and we're looking at the white blood cells specifically and measuring them to see if there's any kind of reaction on the white blood cell on the cellular level, which is indicative of an intolerance, of a sensitivity. Sensitivities and intolerances are not IgE mediated. That's very important because we don't want a patient to think they're getting an allergy test, quote unquote. It's a delayed sensitivity test, and there's a huge difference between that. So we basically measure the delayed reactions over several hours after we've exposed the white blood cells to different foods, chemicals, molds, herbs, and a whole variety of different antigens that we can test for. Our blood cells should obviously not be activated by the foods that we eat. So if they are being activated, it's indicative of some kind of immune reaction going on that it shouldn't be. And that's why we're able to categorize things as different degrees of reactions depending on how much activation on the cell is taking place. Why the ALCAT test? Well, as you can see on here, there's plenty of statistics that we can pick from that are pretty valid points on why we should be looking at food sensitivities. But the reality of the fact is that about 5% of the population suffers from a true IgE-mediated allergy, whereas about 80% of the population we're seeing actually suffers from some kind of food intolerance. It makes sense to look at ALCAT and to look at food sensitivities because we're detecting inflammation on a cellular level. And there has been plenty of studies showing that inflammation is the key component to a lot of different diseases, a lot of different health issues. So it makes sense to look at what is going into our body the most out of anything that we come into contact with the outside world. That would be foods. So it makes sense to look at the foods that we're putting in our system to see if it's the right type of fuel for our body to overcome all these health issues that we can have. When we look at cellular activation, we're seeing that there are foods that cause severe reactions. And those severe reactions, in layman's terms, are foods that are causing cellular degranulation. So as I said before, when we eat the foods that we are used to eating, we're all creatures of habit, those foods, if we sensitize ourselves to them, start triggering our immune system. And the worst possible scenario that can happen is that those foods are destroying our blood cells. And as you can see on this slide, there's actually a picture of a white blood cell degranulating. That's the one on the bottom right-hand side, where it's releasing all those toxic mediators and everything into the bloodstream. So if you look at the purpose of a white blood cell and what it's designed to do to fight things off in your body, it actually contains a lot of these toxic mediators that it uses to fight off and kill viruses, bacteria, fungal infections, things like that. Well, when those things are released into the bloodstream, when those toxic mediators are released into the bloodstream, that's the inflammation process itself. That's inflammation on a cellular level, and that's what our test can detect. The difference between allergy and sensitivity is very distinct. I mean, when you're looking at allergy, you're typically talking about an IgE-mediated reaction. You're talking about a very quick symptom, usually within a few minutes to maybe at most a few hours. And it's definitely exposure related. And we're looking at the specific side of the immune system when we talk about allergies. When we talk about intolerance or sensitivities, we're talking about not this specific branch of the immune system, but we're talking about the innate side of the immune system, where the symptoms are delayed. They're generally less severe, but over a period of time can become chronic symptoms, can become chronic conditions. We're looking at a lot of it having to do with the gut integrity. Obviously, there are, the gut, they've named the second brain because it has so many neurons and so many nerve endings in there that it really does act like its own brain. And it sends so many signals to the brain as far as what is compromising the immune system, what is not, that it really does, you have to take a look at the gut to really get a complete picture at food sensitivities. The ALCAT test is a lot different than an IgG test in that we're not looking at antibody levels. An IgG test looks at IgG, immunoglobulin G antibodies in serum, and that's exposure related, meaning that you have to have prior exposure for you to have a sensitivity or for you to show a reaction on an IgG test. If you stayed away from something altogether, then you're not going to have those antibodies simply because you've never exposed yourself to it. And if you do an IgG test, it's going to come back negative, and it's going to lead you to think that it's okay for you to eat that food, which in fact it's not necessarily true. You can run into some of those false negatives and the false positives as well with IgG. Like I said earlier, we're creatures of habit. If there's somebody who's been eating a lot of a certain food for a long period of time, naturally their IgG antibody levels might be high and might not be an indication that they're actually struggling with that food, that food is causing inflammation, that it's causing part of the symptom. But that could be that the immune system is actually properly functioning because of its adaptive role of an IgG antibody. We've seen some great studies out there of allergists who have desensitized their patients by giving them allergy shots to certain antigens. And when you look at those allergists that are doing that, their IgE levels start dropping and the patient's symptoms start subsiding, but their IgG levels actually start rising. And that's because the immune system goes from specific immunity to innate immunity. The innate immune system branch actually starts kicking in. It starts functioning the way it's supposed to. The patient doesn't feel the symptoms anymore, but what you're left with when you look at the antibody levels is something that pretty much displays a picture that is different than what IgG is supposed to do, which is supposed to identify things that you're having an issue with. So there's a lot of really good literature on that as well. We have some papers and some articles that have been written on there, but it shows you that our test is not exposure related. You can have a cellular reaction whether you've eaten that food before or whether you haven't. And we also test for a lot more antigens. So those are some of the main differences between IgG testing and our testing. One more thing is by looking at the cellular test, you're looking at the final common pathway, because at the end of the day, the inflammation that you're trying to go after by, you're trying to reduce the patient's inflammation. Looking at the ALCAT test is looking at the final common pathway of that inflammatory process, because the endpoint of all of those pathways are the white blood cells being activated and eventually degranulating into the bloodstream. So candidates for the ALCAT test can vary. We do have a lot of different studies. We've had a lot of really interesting feedback on conditions that we can help. As I mentioned in the last slide, inflammation is the key component to it. Patients suffering with chronic issues, any autoimmune issues, those are very good candidates for the ALCAT test. People that struggle to lose weight is another one. We had a Baylor Medical School study done where they took 100 patients and 50 of them went on an ALCAT diet and 50 of them were not on an ALCAT diet. They just went on with their normal diet. And out of the 50 that followed the ALCAT diet, we had 98% lose weight and or improve body composition. So we're seeing that no matter what symptom you test for, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis, digestive issues, chronic migraines, whatever it is, whether it's skin disorders or behavioral issues, neurological issues, we're seeing that a lot of people tend to lose some of that excess weight when they follow our test results. And a lot of that has to do with you allow the immune system a chance to properly function. Naturally, the metabolism speeds up, and you tend to lose some of that extra water weight that the cells were retaining for protection as a result of constantly being offended. We also have a lot of professional athletes that have tested with us. We actually have dedicated a whole entire page on our website to athletics, because we've had so many professional athletes who you would think are in the best shape of their lives that do the ALCAT test and actually improve performance. Definitely check that on our website. It's really interesting to see all of the professional athletes that have tested with us, and you can see right on there the testimonials that they've given us about the ALCAT test. And here on the slide is the last quotation that I gave you guys earlier about 80% of the population suffering from food intolerances, where really about 5% is actually suffering from a true IgE allergy. Here are some of the symptoms, like I mentioned earlier: migraine headaches, digestive disorders, skin disorders, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia is a huge one. We work with children with ADD, autism, OCD. We work with a lot of children with neurological symptoms as well that have shown significant improvements from pre and post taking the ALCAT test and following the results. Here's where we tie it all in with inflammation. Inflammation basically is, as it says on here, it develops as a result of an abnormal trigger, but really what we're looking at is systemic inflammation that takes period over a long term. So it's more of that chronic systemic inflammation that's taking place on a daily basis that you just don't quite, connect the dots and pinpoint the fact that it's coming from a food that you're eating, because it could be something that you ate today, it could be something you ate yesterday, or it could be something you ate 3 days ago that is making you feel that way. The leaky gut example that is displayed on here is definitely something that we want to take a look at. It got the term leaky gut, but really the medical term is increased intestinal permeability, and there's a lot of really good studies out there showing the mechanisms that take place for that to happen. And one thing that Dr. Bleiweiss always, Dr. Bleiweiss being our chief medical officer, one thing that he's always mentioning is the fact that all of us on some level or another are experiencing permeability of the intestines. And one of the key factors that he has been able to pinpoint to that is stress. It's something that we, fail to address, but it's something that I think is worth noting. Most of us live under daily stress, whether it's commuting to work, being at work, anything like that. where stress actually, what it does is it increases your cortisol level, and that cortisol level decreases secretory IgA. And as a result of that secretory IgA, the gaps in the intestinal tract actually widen. And as a result of that, more food macromolecules invade the bloodstream, and that's where your white blood cells are going to be activated. And that's where your white blood cells could release some of those toxic mediators. So intestinal permeability is definitely something that a lot of our providers take a look at in their patients. It's something that we feel also should be addressed. You know, at the same time that you do a food sensitivity test and you follow those results, you probably want to do some kind of protocol to address that intestinal permeability, and we have some of that literature here as well, in case you're wondering or would like to adopt a, you know, quote-unquote leaky gut protocol or intestinal permeability protocol. We definitely have some resources for that as well. The benefits of adding the ALCAT test to your practice is, obviously, for one, what we care about while we're in business and why you're in business is to improve patient health. We feel that this test, whether you're in optimal health like a professional athlete or whether you're suffering from a chronic disease or disorder, we feel that it is something that can be life-changing. We do test for over 400 agents. We do test for foods, additives, chemicals, molds, herbs, anti-inflammatories, a whole spectrum of tests that you can get with the ALCAT, which a lot of IgG tests out there just don't offer. The results are available online within 5 business days. Once you have an account set up with us, you get your username and password, and we send you a notification email once those results are available online. The hard copy gets to your office within the 10 business days. And what's included with each test result is a customized rotation meal plan, which is basically a 4-day food plan for the patient based on their ALCAT test results. As long as the patient tests for at least 100 foods, we're able to create a 4-day rotation plan for them based on the acceptable foods. The basis of that is that we can ask the patient to stay away from the reactive foods, but also we want them to rotate the acceptable foods every 4 days. That way they're preventing themselves from becoming sensitive to that food that they did not show a reaction to. It comes with, the test results also come with a wallet-sized results card. That's so the patient can take it with them when they go grocery shopping, when they go out to a restaurant. You know, they can have that right there and then, and they don't have to carry around the big folder with them. We do have a nutritional staff here in-house that is able to provide support to your clinic, to your office, as well as to your patients. As long as you give us the authorization for us to consult with your patients, we're more than happy to go over each set of results with your patients. Every test includes a free half-hour consult with our nutrition team to go over the results, to address any questions that they might have regarding the rotation diet, any kind of recipes, or anything like that. I always advise my providers to make sure that the patients go home with the results with a hard copy, make sure they read the test guide that comes with the results, and afterwards schedule that consult. That way, they already know how to incorporate the test into the diet. They've already read on how the 4-day rotation diet works, and they're getting the best use out of that free consult. We do have an insurance pre-verification department where if you guys deal with insurance, we can pre-verify their benefits. It's not a guarantee of payment, but it does give us and it gives you a good idea whether the patient even has the benefits for it according to their policy. We have mobile and walk-in blood draw options as well. So if you do draw blood in the office, then we'll send you everything that you need to do so and ship it off back to our laboratory. But if you don't draw blood in the office, we have walk-in partners all across the country. And we also have a mobile phlebotomy network that's available nationwide. They'll go out to your patient's home or to your office if you choose. They'll draw the blood for the patient, and they'll take the test kit with them and ship it off so the patient doesn't even have to do that either. We do also participate in a provider referral network where we have a database of our physicians, the ones that choose to be part of this referral service. If a patient contacts us, which we do get a lot of those inquiries on a daily basis, and if the patient's looking for a provider in their area and you're testing with us, we'll be happy to refer them to you for testing. This is what the results look like. The report is separated into different categories: severe, moderate, mild, and acceptable. So as you see on here, the red is severe, the orange is moderate, the yellow is mild. The green list on the right-hand side is the acceptable foods. The blue boxes on the lower left-hand side are some of the major offenders that we have separated, such as candida, gluten and gliadin, casein, and whey. But the basis of the test and the results is that you're supposed to take these two columns, the severe and the moderate, and eliminate those foods for 3 to 6 months. The mild intolerant foods you're supposed to eliminate for about 1 to 3 months, and the acceptable foods the patient can continue to eat normally the way they would. All we do is we do ask them to rotate that once every 4 days. This is the guide that comes with the results that I was referring to earlier, that I always advise the patients to read this guide before speaking to the nutritionist about it. Or if they're coming back to you and you as the provider are going to be doing that nutrition follow-up with the patient, then I would suggest for you guys to have the patients go home and read this guide first before coming back to you so you guys can review the results. This prevents you, it prevents our nutritionists from having to spoon feed this information to the patients. It also empowers them to start taking control of what they're eating, and it kind of gives them the ability to start taking control of their own health one step at a time. We do get asked all the time that where are we getting our antigens? This is another thing that sets us apart from our competitors. We actually create our own antigens in-house, and we source those antigens to mostly organic foods. Where it's available organic, we do get those foods organically, and we create the antigens from those foods. Where something is not available in an organic form, then obviously we wouldn't be able to do it, but we do go to the cleanest and purest form in those instances. So we're creating our own antigens, and one thing that I think is worth noting is that we've exhausted a whole lot of resources into this department, into our productions department, because we want to have full control over the concentration of each antigen. And I say that because if we're purchasing antigens from a company who manufactures them and we don't really have full control over the concentration of those antigens, those concentrations can change. And what we don't want to see is we don't want to see a concentration of an antigen being higher and then leading to more patients showing a reaction simply because that antigen is hotter, as they call it in the industry, or just more concentrated. So we have a full control over the entire process of creating our own antigens, making sure we do batch-to-batch validation, which means that we're making sure the concentration of each antigen is accurate. We're making sure that each concentration of each antigen is not changing from our previous batch to our next batch. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense to do that so that way you have full control over the quality of the test that you're offering. And that's exactly what we started doing a few years back.